and the Asian Longhorn Tick. They're two emerging issues within beef production in our region. I am Paul Beck. I'm an Extension Livestock Specialist here at the Animal and Food Sciences Department at Oklahoma State University. I want to welcome you. Normally, we would have Dr. David Lawman and Dr. Rosalind Biggs as co-hosts. They are both busy with other extension activities at this time. So for them, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar. One thing I'd like to point out, this is a Ranchers Thursday, but we're connecting it to our cow-calf corner programs. It consists of a newsletter that we put out weekly, along with a weekly segment on the SUNUP television program that are highly valuable in my mind, and also very popular. If you're not a subscriber to the cow-calf corner, I would urge you to either go to the website or scan the QR code and subscribe to that. We have a weekly market update from Dr. Darrell Peel, who will be a presenter on November 13th episode of this webinar series. Also, Dr. Mark Johnson, who presented last week, has a weekly article for that, along with whatever production news that either myself or some of my colleagues write to include in that newsletter. So it's a really good newsletter that comes out Monday morning every week. So I urge you to subscribe to that if you're not already. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and welcome Dr. Cammack onto our webinar. And so we have, he is a relatively new assistant professor in our system. We welcome him to our Ranchers Thursday webinar series, talking about re-emerging pests of beef cattle. And Jonathan, I'll let you take over and introduce yourself further.
All right, can you hear me? Hope so. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. As Dr. Beck mentioned, my name is Dr. Jonathan Cammack. I am the Extension Livestock Entomologist and Parasitologist, housed within the Department of Entomology and Plant Pathology here at OSU. I'm happy to be here today to talk to you about what I'm classifying as some re-emerging pests of cattle. So we're going to talk about a new pest, the Asian Longhorn Tick, and then one that is a re-emerging pest, the new World Screwworm. Give you kind of an update on the status of both of these, and also talk about kind of some biology and background on both of them so that you can be a little more aware of what you might be up against. But unless you've lived, in the absence of internet or any sort of news for, the past few months or years, what's displayed on the screen right now shouldn't be anything new to you. Nationwide, we have two cattle pests that are receiving a lot of media attention. So for the Asian Longhorn Tick here on the left, these are just a couple of headlines from the past, 5 weeks or so. We got Asian Longhorn Ticks on the move. An invasive tick species spreads to 23 states. Should you be concerned? Now, if you take a look on Google and see how many news studies have been published, you can see it in the past week. We're looking at about, I think it was 4 or 5 studies as of about 8:30 this morning that have been released on the Asian Longhorn Tick. And then in the past month, it was about 35 news stories that have been released. Now, if we jump over to the screwworm here on the right-hand side of the screen, you've seen headlines, I hope, about screwworm cases being found in the northern state of Nuevo Leon, Mexico, which is right at the kind of southern border of Texas. And then USDA is naming Arizona as a test site for some screwworm research and kind of management. And then from a news perspective, screwworm stories kind of vastly outweigh Asian longhorn ticks. And in the past week, we're looking at about 40 news articles and then almost 200 over the past month. But just because it's receiving a lot of media attention doesn't mean it's any less important or any more important than our Asian longhorn ticks. One thing that I thought would be fun to share would be, what are people looking for on Google? So I pulled this data using trends.google.com. There's a typo down there in that bottom right-hand corner. It's just supposed to be trends, Trends. So there's an extra couple of letters there if you want to go find information like this yourself. But you can go on there and you can find what people around the world, country, state, whatever, kind of geographic region you're interested in are searching for. And over the past month, we can see that there's some kind of restricted areas where people are looking for Asian longhorn ticks, particularly Kansas, and there's good reason for that. But a lot of the country is searching for New World screwworms and information on that. And so we have quite kind of this wide distribution. And it's just a kind of fun way to look and see what's going on around the world. But what I want to talk to you about first today are ticks. So ticks are arachnids. That means they're closely related to spiders. As an entomologist, I always said that if it had more than 6 legs, I didn't want to work with it, or if it had less than 6 legs, I didn't want to work with it because insects have 6 legs and everything else has got more or less. But now in the position I'm in now, we have a lot of tick problems in Oklahoma. So, here I am working on ticks. So, it's been interesting for sure. But we've got about 850 species of ticks around the world. About 10% of those are found in the United States, but all ticks are obligate blood feeders, depending on, regardless of what or how we might classify them. They're closely related to other arachnids, like we can see in this diagram here on the bottom right. Most of us are aware of ticks because of that blood feeding behavior. Those bites can result in allergic reactions, itching and swelling, like we see in this picture with this black-legged tick here on the right-hand side of the slide. Toxicosis, even paralysis if you or an animal are unfortunate enough to be bit by a tick along your spine or the base of your neck. But ticks are vectors of a lot of pathogens, more pathogens to wildlife, domesticated animals, which includes livestock and pets, in people than any other arthropod. Mosquitoes get a bad rap for the severity of the pathogens that they transmit, but in terms of total number of pathogens that are transmitted, ticks are arguably a little bit more important. In the state of Oklahoma, we've got about 16 species that have been documented in the state, but most of these aren't too much of a concern to people, pets, or livestock. If we look a little bit kind of surrounding Oklahoma, we might have maybe 10 to 30 species of ticks in the states that surround Oklahoma. And kind of region wide, we're looking at maybe 7 to 10 of those species within a given area that are going to really be important. They're going to have some sort of issue that they cause in either livestock production, to our pet health, or human health. And so it's very, usually about half of the number of ticks are what we're concerned about. And because what we can see in these diagrams here on the right-hand side of the slide, they blood feed on a lot of different animal species, which is what leads to a lot of the pathogen issues that we do see. And unfortunately, Oklahoma is one of the top states in the country for some of these more problematic pathogens that we see associated with ticks. Now, for the next few minutes or so, we're going to talk about this new species of tick, the Asian longhorn tick, that has been moving westward across the United States. Over the past few years, you might have seen some news headlines that look similar to this: exotic tick that can kill cattle, tick species that drains animals of blood, another deadly tick identified. This is all real information, and these are certainly concerns that we do have with this particular species of tick. So the Asian longhorn tick, the scientific name is Haemaphysalis longicornis. It is native to Eastern Asia, so China, Japan, Korea, Russia, and it's been moving around the world for the past 125 years or so. It was introduced to Australia, New Zealand, and several Pacific islands in the late 1800s, but around 2010, it was introduced into the United States. The first documented location we have is somewhere between West Virginia, New York, and New Jersey. We don't really know exactly when it was introduced, but from some processing some old samples, we've been able to identify that the species was present in that portion of the country during that time frame. But since then, it's been spreading south and west across North America. And it was confirmed in Oklahoma in August of 2024. And then as of about 3 weeks ago, it was confirmed in Franklin County, Kansas. So they are on the move and they are occupying new states as we progress through the years. Has some kind of biological information. They're extremely small. They're much smaller than most of the ticks that we're used to dealing with. This diagram in the upper right shows an adult female Asian longhorn tick and a larval and nymphal tick next to an insect pen. So that's kind of similar to a push pen that might be used for sewing. So they're not very much larger than the head or the ball that's mounted on the top of that pen. They're active during the warmer months of the year, March through October usually. Their activity peaks in mid-July. One of the reasons they're problematic is they reproduce asexually through a process known as parthenogenesis. So that means they don't have that added challenge of having to locate a mate in the environment. Females are able to lay eggs that will hatch without being fertilized by a male. Populations in the United States are almost 100% female. There's been a report of one male being collected in the field, and a few other reports of them in established laboratory colonies. So for the most part, they're all female. These female ticks can lay up to 2,500 eggs over the course of their lifetime during the late spring and early summer. And that optimal temperature range for egg hatch is a pretty wide range, 64 to 95 degrees. So, during March, June, July, August, we're not really going to have too many temperatures that are going to not result in the hatching of those eggs. That nymphal stage is going to overwinter in leaf litter, which is going to become important when we talk about control strategies. And then they're going to emerge in the spring when it starts to warm up. They're going to look for a host that they can blood feed on, and then the cycle will continue. Total development time is approximately 6 months. Now, in comparison to some of our other ticks, like maybe Lone Star ticks, we're looking at a development time of maybe 2 to 3 years. So they develop a lot faster, and they're a lot smaller than some of our native tick species. Here's a couple of kind of high quality images so you can see what they look like. And then in the following slides, we're going to have some comparative images that you can see, but they're relatively small. So we're looking at, maybe 3 to 5 millimeters or, definitely, kind of in the less than a quarter of an inch range for the entire body size of these nymphal and adult Asian longhorn ticks. So much smaller than what we're used to dealing with in regards to ticks in general. Now, in terms of how we can identify them, there's a couple of different ways. Usually, we look at their head. So their head has kind of this pentagonal characteristic shape, and that'll be a little more apparent on the next slide that I'll show you in comparison to a Lone Star tick. But their heads are shaped quite differently, and their mouth parts are a lot shorter. So here's you a couple of images to kind of show that comparison of their mouth parts. The image here on the left. Sorry, let me get my pointer going here. Sorry, laser pointer. All right, so we've got this Asian longhorn tick here on the left-hand side of this image. This is an adult Asian longhorn tick, and then a nymphal Lone Star tick over here on the right-hand side of the slide. And there's a very clear difference in the shape and length of their mouth parts. Asian longhorn ticks' mouth parts are very short in comparison. So these two little images I have over here on this left-hand panel, Asian longhorn tick at the top, Lone Star tick at the bottom, mouth parts very different and are one of our distinguishing characteristics. And then this photograph that's taking up most of the slide is the two of these ticks kind of next to a penny, so you can see how small this full-grown Asian longhorn tick is in comparison to that penny and that nymphal Lone Star tick. A couple more images for comparison. So brown dog ticks are going to be what are going to be most likely kind of confused with Asian longhorn ticks, both in terms of kind of color and mouth part arrangement, but there's a very distinct difference in their shape. So they're a lot smaller and they're a lot more circular than our brown dog ticks. So brown dog ticks are going to kind of look like watermelon seeds, whereas Asian longhorn ticks are going to be a lot more circular. We did publish a pest alert last summer on the species when it was first documented in Oklahoma. If you want some more information, you can scan that QR code with the camera on your smartphone and be taken to that document, or a website that I'll give you on my very last slide will have that you can go to for a lot of the information that I'm going to be presenting throughout the presentation today. Now, in terms of how they're interacting in the environment, each life stage of the of the Asian Longhorn Tick is going to take a blood meal, whether that's a larva, a nymph, or an adult. They're going to get on some sort of a host animal to take a blood meal, and then they're going to drop off, and they're going to spend some time in the environment to digest that blood meal. Ticks typically spend about 90% of their life cycle off of those host animals. So they only get on that host animal, take a blood meal, they get really full, then they drop off, and then they hang out in the leaf litter or somewhere protected that's got high humidity. That way they can digest that blood meal and molt to their next life stage. This diagram here on the right shows what we would typically expect with a three host tick, like something maybe like a Lone Star tick, where those eggs that the female deposits over here on the right hand side at about 3 o'clock, those eggs are going to hatch into very small larvae. Those larvae are going to look for some sort of a host animal, usually something small like a squirrel or other rodent. They're going to get a blood meal. They're going to drop off that host, digest that blood meal, and then molt. Later on in the year, they're going to look for another host. Host is going to get a little bit bigger with each of these successive life stages, maybe a rabbit, raccoon, dog, or something. Get a blood meal, take that blood meal, drop off, digest, rinse and repeat. And then when they molt to the adult stage, they're looking for a much larger host animal, usually a deer or a cow. And this is kind of what we typically think of for the three host tick life cycle. Now, with Asian Longhorn ticks, they don't necessarily follow this same cycle. We can find all three life stages, larvae, nymphs, and adults all present on the same species of host animal, such as a cow, and also on the same individual animal. So reports of thousands of Asian Longhorn ticks being present on an animal are true and are possible, and they can result in death of that animal due to blood loss. There's a lot of species of animals that are moving Asian Longhorn ticks through the environment. They've been documented on about 150 species in the United States over the past 15 years, ranging from a number of species of wildlife to livestock to other animals that might be present in our environment, such as our pets, dogs and cats, rabbits, pigs, and even on people. So essentially, nothing is safe in the environment from becoming a host to Asian Longhorn ticks. So that means we've got a lot of animal species in the environment that are contributing to their continual movement and spread. Here's a couple of images to show you kind of what severe infestations look like. We typically don't see tick numbers on cattle, this high or this heavy when we're thinking about some of our more, native and kind of more common species. So if you do happen to see something like this on one of your animals, like where maybe, tailhead is completely covered in ticks like we see here, or you just see hundreds of ticks all kind of lined up feeding, that is definitely going to be cause for concern. And, you might want to reach out to your extension office or your veterinarian to look into this. Now, a little bit of the good news. Because this is a kind of subtropical species, they need areas of high humidity to be able to survive. There are only certain parts of the United States that are going to be most likely to support their populations. And eastern Kansas, central Oklahoma, and East Texas are about that western edge of their predicted range, as kind of illustrated right here in this yellow color. So at least in Oklahoma, in Kansas, we're looking at about I-35 kind of being the border where we would expect them to be able to survive. Anywhere west of that, all the way over to the Rockies, is probably going to be a little too dry for most of the year. To be able to support populations. But that doesn't mean that Asian Longhorn ticks can't be moved to those areas on infested animals. So if you're, moving animals from maybe a cow-calf operation in the eastern part of one of these states and they're going west to a feedlot, those animals could be infested with Asian Longhorn ticks, so they could get brought to that environment. But they're unlikely to survive because the environmental conditions in the western part of the United States are going to be not very susceptible for tick development and survival. Now, if you do have Asian Longhorn ticks, what can we do about them? The good news is most of the products that are labeled for tick control in general, so these acaricides, are effective against managing Asian longhorn ticks. So I've got a couple of different products displayed here, or product groups. On the left-hand side of this slide, those are pour-on acaricides, and the right-hand side of the slide, those are testing some spray-on acaricides. Both of these are testing against nymphs of the Asian longhorn tick. For the pour-ons, we see 100% mortality within an hour of exposure to these 5 different products. So you only see one colored line there because all of those lines follow that same trajectory. Now, on the right-hand side of the slide, when we're looking at some of these spray-ons products, we've got 100% mortality within an hour for 2 of these products, and then 100% mortality within 24 hours for one of those products. So these products that we have that are labeled for tick control in general are effective against Asian longhorn ticks. So we do have tools that we can use to manage them. One of the best things that we can do for dealing with Asian longhorn ticks is going to be using IPM, or a number of different strategies to control these pests, not just relying on, maybe a pesticide or environmental modifications, but using all of the tools that we have available to work together. So I want you to focus on Farm 1 and Farm 3 that's displayed on this slide right now. Farm 1, they kept a closed herd, so didn't bring any new animals in, whereas Farm 3 kept an open herd, so they continued, buying and selling animals, moving animals in and out. Each one of these farms had some sort of a acaricide treatment plan in place where they sprayed the animals with either a 10% or a 40% permethrin spray in the spring, set one treatment. And then they had either a monthly or a yearly brush hogging. So they're getting rid of tall grass, thick vegetation, the material where the ticks are going to be kind of hanging out when they're not on animals, but also the material or the vegetation that the ticks are going to climb up on when they're questing for that next blood meal. And we see drastic drops in the number of ticks. So just under 5,000 in 2019 here on Farm 1. And I believe they got that number down to less than 100, maybe even less than 50 in 2021, just by using a permethrin spray on the animals and some brush management. And then Farm 3 over here, we see a very similar thing, 2,000 down to just over 500 in a year, just by managing the environment and managing using that acaricide. Now, Farm 2, they had animals in and out. They didn't use a acaricide treatment on the animals. They did some brush hogging, and we see there is an increase in the number of ticks from that first year to the second year. So, perhaps if they had added in a permethrin spray on their animals, this value would look completely different. Now, in terms of just some general information for managing ticks and also preventing the spread of Asian longhorn ticks, we want to limit the movement of animals. The acaricides that we do have work well against Asian longhorn ticks, so make sure you're using every tool that you have. Ticks that are present on the head of the animal can easily be controlled with either an ear tag or a synthetic pyrethroid spray along their ears, below their jaw, and along their jawline, neck, and brisket. That can go really far in helping manage tick problems. If you needed another reason to get rid of eastern red cedar, eastern red cedars kind of create these bubbles of moisture in the environment where animals like to hang out to cool off. And when a deer or a cow or something that might have a tick load gets under that eastern red cedar, if those ticks have gotten the blood meal they need, they can drop off. And now they're able to survive underneath the base of that cedar tree in an area that's a little more humid than the surrounding environment. So if you've got eastern red cedar problems, you can get rid of those to help control some tick movement as well. A lot of the dewormer products that we have available on the market also provide some residual control for ticks. And then if you're in an area where patch burning of pastures is done frequently, we see pretty significant reduction in tick numbers in general when patch burning is implemented. Now, our main concern with Asian longhorn ticks is this pathogen called Theileria orientalis, which causes cattle theileriosis. This pathogen has kind of the same distribution or native range as the tick in general, so East Asia and kind of the South Pacific. And the Asian longhorn tick is the primary vector of this pathogen. Other biting arthropods, such as stable flies, lice, other tick species are potential vectors as well, as are the equipment that we're using to work animals. Either needles for vaccination, dehorning equipment, or tagging equipment are all potential mechanical vectors of this pathogen. So this image over here on the right-hand side are some red blood cells from a cow in Virginia that was infected with this protozoan, and all these dots that we can see here inside these blood cells, these kind of dark purple areas, those are all protozoans that have now invaded the red blood cells of this animal. And here's another image that's should be coming. There we go. That's a lot more infection. So all of those darkly stained areas in this image, those are all protozoans that are present inside the red blood cells of these cattle. We do have a native genotype of Theileria orientalis present in the United States, but it's usually not pathogenic. So there's a lot of strains of this species that do exist. The Akita genotype is the genotype that is most important to cattle production because it's the most pathogenic. So far, it's been found in 17 states across the country, and these states pretty much follow the distribution of the Asian Longhorn ticks. But the pathogen has not yet been documented in a number of states, including Oklahoma, Texas, Colorado, and New Mexico. But Kansas, Missouri, and Arkansas, states immediately surrounding Oklahoma, do have both this tick and the pathogen. Symptoms of cattle theileriosis are often minimal, but they're very similar to anaplasmosis. So anemia, fever, pale membranes, decreased feed intake. So if you have an animal that's you suspect is anaplasmosis positive, and you're treating them with antibiotics, but they're not getting better, the animals might have theileria. So it's a pretty good indicator that you want to reach out to your veterinarian to maybe reassess what's going on. One of the main differences about theileria in comparison to anaplasmosis is that calves can become infected with theileria, which is something we typically don't see with anaplasma. And then mortality rates are pretty variable. We can see them as low as 3% or as high as 90%. So this has a potential for a huge impact on your herds. But unfortunately, there's no treatment for theileriosis. Prevention is going to be the key for managing this. To prevent it, we want to limit the movement of animals from known positive areas to uninfected areas to prevent and limit both the spread of the vector, the Asian Longhorn Tick, and the pathogen Theileria. If possible, keep closed herds. I know if you're a cow-calf operation, that might be hard, so you're going to have to think about managing your herd a little bit better, or in a different way to prevent this. But there are certain things that we can do. We can use our cultural control methods, keeping grass and brush cut short, using fire to get rid of that tick overwintering habit. So late winter, early spring, you can burn out leaf litter and kind of thick vegetation that can help remove that overwintering habit and also kill some of those ticks. And then use the different pesticides that we do have approved for management of ticks on cattle. And then be in tune with your animals, regularly inspect them for ticks so that you don't end up with a cow that's got thousands of ticks feeding on it. So if you do suspect you've got theileria, if you've got symptoms that are similar to anaplasma, but they're not being treated with antibiotics, or not responding correctly when they're treated with antibiotics, quarantine those animals, cease movement of animals into and out of your operation, and then work with your veterinarian to collect a blood sample and get that submitted to your state animal disease diagnostic laboratory, because we want to make sure that we're not spreading theileriosis through the environment. Now, to kind of wrap up on the Asian Longhorn ticks, they're moving west. They're small. They're here in Oklahoma and a lot of surrounding areas, but they do look different from our native tick species. Unfortunately, they're found on a lot of host animals, and they're a vector of a pathogen that's highly pathogenic to cattle. Then it cannot be treated. And really managing Asian Longhorn ticks is going to be IPM, using every tool possible that we have in our box to try to manage them, and then limiting the movement of animals to prevent the spread of both of those. Now, the last half of my presentation, we're going to focus on an update on New World Screwworm. But first, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on this pest. What is New World Screwworm? It's a fly, specifically the larvae of a blowfly. So this is a picture of a New World Screwworm here on the upper right-hand corner of your slide. And there are a lot of species of blowflies in the environment, but this one in particular differs from those other species because its larvae are obligate parasites of living organisms, mainly mammals. And what that means is they have to feed on the living tissue of a living animal in order to be able to survive. Most blowflies are decomposers, where their larvae are feeding on either carrion, manure, rotting plant material, some other decomposing organic matter in the environment, and not necessarily feeding on living tissue. Now, this term screwworm is used to describe the feeding behavior of the larvae. So we see a diagram kind of here in the bottom right-hand side of the slide, this drawing of these larvae that are all feeding head down. So down here at the bottom of the slide, these are all where their heads and their mouth parts are at. So they've kind of burrowed head down and they're feeding. And then what we can see here, this is the posterior end where they're breathing from. So they're able to feed without having to come up for air. And because they move head first down into that larval tissue or that host tissue, that's why they're called screwworms. This feeding on live tissue is called myiasis. That's the infestation of living tissue with fly larvae. The way this happens is female flies are attracted to smells produced by bacteria. So say a cow gets a cut on some barbed wire or a piece of equipment or machinery out in your pasture. We're not walking around with Neosporin and Band-Aids and treating the cattle to make sure that they don't get, mildly infected wounds all the time. So cow gets some sort of a small wound, even as small as a tick bite or a barbed wire puncture. That wound becomes infected with bacteria. Those bacteria start to produce smells. Flies are attracted to those smells, so they'll be attracted to that wound. Female flies will lay their eggs around that wound. Those eggs will hatch into very small larvae. Those larvae will start to feed on kind of that necrotic tissue and the bacteria that are present around that wound, but then they'll eventually start feeding on the living tissue of that host animal as they develop. So we have a picture of this Hereford bull over here on the right-hand side of the slide, where most of this animal's, left eye is gone, and a very large portion of its head is now infested with a mass of larvae. Let me give you some information about the life cycle of the New World screwworms. So the female flies are out in the environment. They lay their eggs again on that open wound or around natural body openings that might be infected on that host animal. Those eggs are typically going to hatch in about a day. After those eggs hatch, those larvae are going to feed. They're going to grow over the course of the next 5 to 7 days. They're going to feed on that living tissue of that host animal, whether it's a cow, a goat, a deer, whatever animal they might have laid their eggs on. They're going to feed on that. And here's an image kind of in this orangish square hexagon over here of these larvae exhibiting that kind of characteristic head down feeding behavior. When they're done feeding, they're going to drop off of that host animal, burrow down into the soil to pupate, that transformative stage where they're going to become or transform from this larva or maggot form to an adult fly. And then over the next 5 to 7 days, they're going to develop and emerge. And this typical life cycle takes about 2 to 3 weeks. Then the adult flies are going to be free living and present in the environment over the span of about 2 weeks, where they're going to be out looking for host animals to lay their eggs on. So one of the questions I've gotten over the past year or so is, why is this called new? Haven't we had this problem before? It's not called new, it's called New World. So that name New World screwworm refers to the geographic distribution of this species, the Western Hemisphere, so North America, Central America, and South America. And it's used to differentiate the species that causes myiasis in animals in the New World from species that are on the other side of the world, in Africa and Europe, and Australia, that do very similar things to animals that also cause myiasis. So just from a geographic standpoint, we call the species that we have here the New World screwworm, and then on the other side of the planet, we call that species commonly the Old World screwworm. And again, why is it called new? Haven't we had this problem before? Yes. New World screwworms were typically found throughout a lot of the southern United States during the warmer portions of the year. This diagram down here in the bottom left, the light blue colors show where these flies kind of migrated to on an annual basis in the early 1950s as it warmed up in the spring. So we could see them as far north as kind of the Kansas-Nebraska line, and then also throughout the Southeast in some really bad years. So a lot of the southern United States dealt with this problem for a very long time. Oklahoma was actually screwworm free from 1964 to 1971 when this program was first implemented. And then in terms of when our last recorded cases are, Oklahoma 1976, New Mexico 1979, and then Texas 1982. Now, during that 1962 outbreak, that was one of our bad ones and one of the last ones we had before we had a screwworm-free period in Oklahoma. That's the kind of the introduction of the sterile screwworm or sterile fly technique that we're going to talk about on the next couple of slides. During the summer of 1963, we released a little over 8 million sterile flies over Oklahoma. And so those were able to combat those natural populations and help knock the fly numbers down. So the blue line is the fly numbers in 1962, orange line is fly numbers in 1963, or sorry, number of cases. And what you can see is that there is a huge drop after that program was implemented in the 1960s. So how the sterile insect technique works is they use radiation to disrupt the development of these flies. And so it makes them sterile so that when male flies mate with female flies in the environment, they're not, the female flies are not able to produce fertilized eggs. One of the main reasons this works is because this species mates only once, and so the females are laying infertile eggs. This program started in the 1950s and has continued across North America through Central America and down to the Darien Gap of Panama, which was our kind of traditional quarantine line. So here's kind of showing you the flight path for 2008 in Panama, where they were releasing 40 million flies a week in comparison to 8 million flies being released across the entire year of 1963 in the state of Oklahoma. And these different colored lines show where they flew their paths of these different flies. So airplanes fly around and they kick these little cardboard boxes out that are about, I don't know, 6 inches by 5 inches or so, full of flies, kick them out into the environment. And then the adult males look for the wild females and they mate with them. So in terms of what sterile screwworm fly releases looked like in Oklahoma, we've got 8 million being released in 1963, and then kind of a peak in 1972 of about 14 million. And that's over the course of the year. So we're talking orders of magnitude larger now with how effective this program is at releasing 40, 50, even 100 million flies per week in some instances. So the last known screwworm outbreak in the United States occurred in the Florida Keys in 2016 with a species of endemic white-tailed deer that are called key deer. These are white-tailed deer that are about 3 foot tall. They don't get any bigger than that, but they just look like normal whitetails, but they're small because they live on an island. So on September 30th, 2016, a deer was noticed with myiasis. We've got some animals here on the left-hand side of the screen. There's a wound right here at the base of the antlers on this one animal because it was during the rut. The bucks were fighting. They ended up with open wounds that became infected, and then the flies laid their eggs. And here's a deceased animal that had an injury right at the base of its antlers from fighting during the rut. And there are mature third instar larvae of the screwworm feeding on the tissue of this now deceased animal. This led to an immediate response from USDA, APHIS, ARS, and also the state of Florida, trying to figure out how widespread the problem was. And what they identified was that 12 additional keys within the Florida Keys were infested. So now over the next 6 months, from this huge response, they released 188 million sterile flies, inspected 17,000 animals at checkpoints, had 280-ish surveillance events on the mainland or that southern tip of Florida around Miami, and then 457 surveillance events in the Florida Keys. So over these dozen islands that were infected, they looked at essentially every animal that came in and out because there was only one road to get through. So they had a very contained area. And this cost $3 million. Now, this is all just to kind of show you that, this is not going to be easy to control, with the current spread of it, because even in somewhere like an isolated island in the Florida Keys where there's one road in and one road out, it still took a lot of time, took a lot of effort, and it took a lot of money, but they were successful at getting rid of that problem. Now, where things are at right now, since July of 2023, populations of the screwworm have been moving north from that permanent quarantine zone in Panama. This map is from over the summer, showing where animal entry ports are along the southern border of the United States, which had been suspended. But as of about 11 months ago, populations of screwworms were detected in very far south Mexico, and they have continued to move north. Now, this spread of animals, spread of screwworms is likely due to a number of different reasons, either the illegal or uninspected movement of animals, or animals being put in a trailer. So these flies can only move a certain distance within a given day. But if we put an infected cow in a trailer, it can move hundreds of miles within a day and get up a little bit farther away from this kind of zone that's kind of, this line that we see here right across central Mexico, which is where most of the cases are currently located. Here's the most recent map that came out last week showing where screwworm cases have been found in Mexico. The closest case to the United States was about 70 miles south of the U.S. border. But we do know that that was an animal that was moved from an infested area to a feedlot. So an animal that should not have been moved was moved and it got there. But that case has been closed and there have been no further cases associated with that. Now, as of 2 weeks ago, we have another case kind of right here in Nuevo Leon. It's about 90 miles south of the U.S. border. Again, that one is also a movement of an infested animal from that infested zone in southern Mexico to a feedlot, so we can at least track those animals. USDA, COPEG, which is the group in Panama that raises sterile screwworm flies, and Mexico are all working together to increase sterile fly production and also release more sterile flies in central Mexico. So there are a lot of agencies that are working on this. But what can you do and how can you help with this? Although that sterile insect technique and program is highly effective, it's not the only tool we have. We're going to have to use every tool we've got to manage this pest, and it's going to start with IPM. And really doing everything we can to prevent these problems from starting in the first place. Not moving animals that haven't been inspected or haven't been treating, and then also monitoring our animals. Make sure that if you find an animal that's got a wound on it, you get that treated, get it cleaned up. And also, if you do see something suspicious, collect it and get it sent in. That way it can be identified. And then continued monitoring and surveillance throughout the times of the year when screwworms could potentially be a problem. So here's an example of an animal with a wound that, if these animals weren't being worked on a regular basis, this could be very problematic if we were in the kind of throes of a screwworm outbreak. So you need to be kind of in tune with your animals, checking them regularly, looking for wounds like this, big or small, and making sure that the animals are treated with appropriate antibiotics so that those wounds can heal before they become infected. Here's a couple of images of screwworm larvae in living tissue. I believe this is a cow here on the left. So all these little circles that we can see here, these are the back end of these screwworm larvae. They're all feeding in this wound. This picture over here is the ear of a goat that is being fed on by these fly larvae. So, massive amounts of trauma, but we need to make sure that we're checking animals for wounds that contain living larvae within those tissues. And the reason we care about larvae and not the adults is both of these are metallic green flies that are present in the environment, found around cattle. The one here on the left is a blowfly that feeds only on decomposing resources. The one here on the right is related to a housefly, and it feeds only on cow manure. So neither of these are screwworms. Neither of these are problematic. So that's why we need to be monitoring for fly larvae on living animals. Some kind of takeaway information: New World Screwworm not currently present in the United States. This is serious, but please don't panic. But our response is going to require participation from everybody that can. Ranchers, farmers, people that like to be outside, hunters, hikers, people that like to look at birds, wildlife managers. Everybody's going to have to participate in monitoring animals and then reporting anything that they might see. So what we're looking for are fly larvae that are feeding only on live animals. And if you suspect an animal is infested with New World screwworms, contact your county extension office or veterinarian immediately. That's going to be the best thing that you can do so that we can get samples collected, identified, and then responded to appropriately. I've got a website available that you can get information from. If you go to livestockbugs.okstate.edu/NWS, it will take you straight to this page where I'm updating information as it comes out on screwworms. You could click on this top link right here. This is view the most recent New World screwworm outbreak map published by USDA. Click that link, scroll about halfway down that page, and it'll show you where they have been found. So very good resource. Please use it. That's what it's there for. Another resource for you is this database that is for managing pests of livestock. You can either go to veterinaryentomology.org or scan this QR code with the camera on your smartphone and go to this website. Right here in the middle of this page is a button that says Find a Pesticide. You can click on that and it will take you to a page where you can enter your location, your livestock animal, and your pest, and it will tell you every product that's available for controlling pests in your state. This website is undergoing an update, so it will change sometime soon, but it's going to become a little more effective at pulling that information and making that information available for you. And then this slide, in my next slide, kind of showed at the beginning of the presentation and kind of our pre-slides, but I have an ongoing survey project where I'm looking for cattle producers that live and raise cattle in Oklahoma that have interacted with ticks. And I want to know, kind of what you're doing to protect yourselves and your animals from ticks and how big of a problem ticks are for you and your cattle production. So if you'd like to help me out with this, I would appreciate it if you could scan that QR code with the camera on your phone. It'll take you directly to a Qualtrics survey. It should take about 15 minutes. Also, you can email me. I can send you the link directly if you don't want to do this on your phone. My contact information will be up in 2 slides, but I would appreciate any help I could get with this survey project. I'm using this to develop more relevant extension information that can help you address your problems with your cattle and ticks. Dr. Rosalind Biggs, also with Extension, asked that this be included. So the College of Veterinary Medicine has an ongoing project where they are looking for cattle herds in Oklahoma and surrounding states where kind of within that range where Asian Longhorn ticks have been identified. And they're trying to test these animals for the presence of theileria, anaplasma, and also the presence of Asian Longhorn ticks. So if you would like to participate in that study or want more information from her, please reach out to Dr. Rosalind Biggs or this QR code, I believe, will take you to a form that you can fill out to receive more information. With that, I've reached the end of my presentation. I do have a short survey here, so I can collect some information from you to help me develop some better presentations in the future. My contact information is here on the left-hand side of the slide. I use my website, livestockbugs.okstate.edu, to disseminate information, as well as both Instagram and X, I guess formerly known as Twitter. My account name is at okstate_life. LIFE, which stands for Livestock and Forensic Entomology. You can follow me on there to get up-to-date information, and I'll be glad to take any questions that anybody might have. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Cammack. Any questions that you have at this time can be placed into the chat or within the Q&A area. I have a question just to kick it off. So what control measures are we going to see for the screwworm if it makes it to Oklahoma? Are we going to see a return of the dipping vats, or what are there new products or any products that have come about since the 70s that will make it easier to control?
Yeah, that's an interesting and both a difficult and easy question to answer, right? So we have seen conditional approval within the past month of doramectin being approved for kind of the treatment and prevention of screwworms, but we can't just repeatedly give the animals doramectin shots, because we'll start to see resistance issues with some of our other pests and parasites that those products are designed for. So we still have to make sure we're following label advice. But we do have conditional approval right now. I know there are some groups with EPA and USDA that are evaluating products that are available in other parts of the world that are not registered for use against screwworms in the United States. They're trying to identify what products we can get registered. So there certainly are products that are available, and I'm certain that they will, if there's anything new or old that maybe has kind of been phased out in the United States, if it's deemed worthy of bringing back to help control, that it will happen.
Thank you. So we have a question in the Q&A that some livestock feed companies are including garlic or other essential oils into various feedstuffs with the claim that is a fly control or even a tick repellent. Is this valid? And what is the
I
best
think I get
route?
asked this, every time I give a talk about fly control, and um, as far as I'm aware, there are no research studies that have been conducted on this. I mean, there's anecdotal information certainly to suggest that something like garlic, might be a little bit of a, repellent to some flies. But, right now we need to be focusing on, scientific stuff that's been shown to work. So, following, guidance of either a veterinarian or using these products that are getting conditional approval, such as doramectin, and treating animals. If you see open wounds, it's not like we're just going to be able to put out a tub of mineral with garlic in it and in March, and we wish the cattle well for the summer. We still have to go out and be monitoring those animals, checking for wounds, and then treating them with providing them proper wound care, and other tools that we can utilize.
So a follow-up with that is anecdotally or producer testimonials, maybe even some. Seems like I've read it in a foreign source. Uh, what about topical application of these essential oils or garlic? Is that
So
of
I
any
with
use or?
the a lot of the essential oil products, usually we've got to put them into some sort of an of oil carrier, usually food grade mineral oil. But at least in terms of using these products for like repelling something like horn flies, we're really only looking at maybe a week of repellency. So unless you've got the time to gather your animals up and run them through a chute on a weekly basis and treat them with these essential oils, I would say, try to find something different that's going to be a little bit longer lasting.
Yeah, thank you. Um, Brian Frecking from our southeastern Oklahoma area office asks, how far can a New World screwworm fly move it in a day?
Yeah, we're typically looking at movement of maybe 5 to 7 miles, and that's if wind conditions are right. Now, if we've got a crazy wind blowing from the north, like we've had the past couple of days here in Oklahoma, that would certainly impede their ability to fly north because it would be burning up energy. Um, that they're flying against. And the opposite of that is if we've got a strong wind blowing from the south, or maybe a large weather event such as a hurricane that comes in, and we've got a weather pattern that could contribute to their movement, that's also certainly possible.
Excellent, Dr. Cammack. I don't see any further questions. We'll leave it open for just a few, for a minute or so to see if we have any follow-ups. But yes, please hit these links or use these QR codes to help with these studies and provide feedback for a lot of our extension programmings. These are going to be extremely useful, especially as we have these things that seem to be cropping up almost continually. I don't know if I still believe in black swan events. I think the incident of unexpected events, we should just be ready for them at any time instead of we won't be able to predict what's next, but we know something's going to happen. So we've got ticks and screwworms, and I just can't wait until we have mega flies or something show up too as well. So with that, thank you very much for attending this session of the Cow-Calf Corner tie-in of the Ranchers Thursday Lunchtime webinar series for Dr. Cammack and my colleagues, Dr. Lawman and Dr. Biggs. Thank you, and we will see you next week where where Brian Pugh and myself will talk about wheat pasture prospects and potential management of these cattle on wheat pasture this year. So thank you very much.